So excited to stand here. Kerfuffle. Thanks for your patience while we work on the technology. Here, take this off just one moment. Okay, good morning. Better? I'm a hand talker person, so this could be challenging for me to speak with you with only one hand. I'll try to do my best. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you this morning and this afternoon. And more than the invitation for me to be here, I can't tell you how much we, your small team of people who are working on creating together this new story for the conference, appreciate your willingness to engage in this conversation with us today and over the course of the next 12 months. So I want to just tell you a little bit about my work, a tiny bit, and some work I've done with the folks at First Congregational and why I'm excited to be here. I am a fundraiser by training and have been in the nonprofit sector for 25 years or more. So I loved all this. How long have people been here? How long have people been doing this work? I've been a practitioner in the nonprofit sector pretty much my whole professional life. I love working with mission-oriented organizations. It's very thrilling for me, and I feel like organizations in the nonprofit sector, whether they're secular or faith-based, are really at the leading edge of change in our human experience. And I believe that particularly the United Church of Christ has a unique role to play for Christians who are really dedicated to living a life of faith, a life of practice, but also a life of social justice, compassion, and humanity. And so it's very personally inspiring for me to be with you and to help you in the way that I can really think about co-creating the future for the conference. Because there is a lot at stake, and I'm not going to pretend to know everything that's going on in your world as it relates to what's happening with your churches, what's happening in your communities. But suffice to say, I live in this nonprofit world all the time, and so I have a sense of how important this conversation is to really creating the next 100 years for the United Church of Christ in the Rocky Mountain region. So I specialize in working in three areas: governance, strategy, and money. And so people call our company all the time to talk about those things: strategy, governance, and money. And I'm sure there might be some people here who have a little suffering around money and might not have enough money at your church. And that's often a reason for people to get a little bit nervous, and it's often the primary reason that people make the phone ring at Third Sector Group. But what's really underneath that, what's really underneath the money conversation for any organization is, what are you up to on the planet? And so Corbin mentioned just a little while ago this fine distinction that we want you to hold for today. And that is, each of you in some way, shape, or form is connected to a church or many churches, but we want you to think about the conference and the recognition that the conference is you are the conference. And so when we talk about our future, we really are going to do it in the context of the conference. And I know that a few years ago, many of you were at this conference, and you did some open space conversations around social justice and how important that is as an identity and for individual churches. But today, we're really going to be focused on talking about the conference and who we are together. So, with that, I'm going to start. I've got a few slides, and I want to just, as we get to the end of the kind of framing part of our conversation, then I'll tell you a little bit more about what we're going to do, but we're basically going to spend most of today talking together. And this morning we're going to do some open space, and I know most of you are familiar with that, and this afternoon we're going to do a little World Cafe. I know most of you are familiar with that, but I will recap the ground rules just to make sure everybody's clear. So, do I have a clicker, or I guess it's me. I have a clicker and I am here. You'll be my clicker? Okay. Okay, so, again, I'm going to try to talk with my one hand. So, click away. So, I want to talk about what is the taproot of organizations. And again, remember that my context in all of this is that people call us because often there's something broken in their organization, or they're challenged, or they have an opportunity that they really want to seize or harness. And what I have discovered as a result of my work, and probably many of you are working in the private sector and have had similar experiences to this, is that it really makes a difference how you talk about these important statements. And so I've tried to shape here kind of a simple, and I don't mean that like not important, but rather clear distinction about mission, about values, and about vision. And our focus in terms of our conversation today is really going to centralize around the ideas and concepts. Today we're just kind of generating and harvesting ideas around a potential vision for the Rocky Mountain Conference. As Tom mentioned earlier, your board of directors has spent time this last winter really clarifying why we exist and what we believe in and how we will behave. So that part of the work is going to help shape the context for our conversation today. A lot of times, and I realize not everybody likes this work, right? Most of us come to our community service, our professions, even our work in our families, really to do stuff, to get things done. But it's really important for this conference to hear from all of you in order to get things done effectively, because there is a lot at stake for this kind of church in the Rocky Mountain region. So we're going to be focused today on helping you tap into and remember the importance of the mission of the conference, not your individual churches, the values of the conference, and together really beginning to define ideas. Today is just idea generation, ideas around a potential vision, which we're kind of codifying or suggesting is more about our story. What is our new story? Okay, so I want to help you understand that this is not necessarily a linear process. It's not like you write these statements down and then magically they all work together. When you think about an organization, there's sort of a dynamism in it. And if you can think of the conference as an organism, as a living being thing, not an intellectual concept, but as a collection of churches and individuals who are working together in common cause to advance the United Church of Christ in the Rocky Mountain region, it's useful to recognize there's part of the organization that is more durable, more perpetual, more permanent, and there's another part that is really more active, more energetic, and stimulating. And this really comes from Jim Collins, who some of you may know is a thought leader in organizational life. And I think this, for me, best kind of clarifies this nebulous territory that we find ourselves in when we're talking about moving an organization forward. And what I like about it is this sense of yin and yang, the recognition of a paradox that on the one hand, what we love about this conference, what we cherish about this conference, ought to be sacred, ought to really have a multi-generational sense about it. and a commitment to preserve the core of the organization. So the ideological part of the conference is the combination of the mission and the values. The mission and the values that work to serve as this strong foundation, the solar plexus, the core, the rock of the conference. Yeah? Okay. On the other side is the idea of our future, which is where we can be incredibly flexible and dynamic, creative. Doesn't mean that the core isn't creative or vivid or rich. It just has a different function to play. So today we're going to spend time thinking about how do we energize, how do we stimulate progress, how do we really move the conference forward in the context of those things that matter most to us, why we're here and what we stand for. So the role of vision really helps to enable, ennoble, and advance the mission and the ideology of the organization. They're not separate. They don't live in isolation from one another. They're part and connected to each other. So I just want to help shape a context for how to think about vision and the important role that it plays. And to remind us that our job today is simply to begin to allow ourselves to dream and imagine, to talk to each other, to share. It's completely okay to talk about stuff that's broken and isn't working that you want to fix. It's a great time to do that. Vision can often be born out of frustration, challenges, speed bumps, threats, etc. So I think I've said enough about that. Let's move on to the next slide. So the way I want you to think about yourself today here is as part of this flow, this creative energy together, that we're all contributing to it. And we'll talk in a minute about the ground rules for how we're going to hold this conversation. But really just think about the power of moving forward, advancing the conference, and really the potential power when all 77 member churches are really moving in the same direction. Now, this does not mean wholesale subscription to some kind of platitudes or silly ideas. This is serious, serious work. And when it's done well, it creates a movement that is unstoppable like a river. Right? When we're really moving together, when our intentions are clear, when it is rooted in what we stand for, the potential for moving a movement, creating a movement, advancing a cause is nearly unstoppable. It's incredibly powerful, like a river, cutting through rock again and again and again. So that's the quality of thinking and creativity that I want to encourage you to bring to today's conversation. Okay, so we're going to really open ourselves up to talking together, and we're going to begin this morning with an open space conversation about our shared future. Now, I've got a lot of words up here, but how many of you have participated in open space either with this conference or in some other capacity? So just really raise your hands high, high. Don't be shy. Okay, great. So really about half of you have and half of you haven't. So for those of you who have, think of this as a refresher. And for those of you who haven't, really want to make sure you understand how wonderful this process can be in potentially creating a lot of space for creative thinking. So this is going to be a simple, very easy way to catalyze a lot of conversations. And really, I want you to know, and I don't know, Benjamin, does every United Church of Christ have this sense of extravagant welcome like FCC? Implicitly. So, right, this is really open space is incredibly invitational. incredibly invitational. And sometimes when we humans get together, we have a tendency to think, I must take a position. And I want you to really come from a point of commitment, not a position, not really standing firm on your position of a particular thing, or a particular idea, but really come from a point of commitment. Like, what are you up to for real? Why did you come here? Why do you care about this conference? Why do you care about your church? And that's the space, the spirit, and the mindset that I want you to bring to this morning's conversation. And you'll find that this is a very simple and powerful way to catalyze that energy. This open space is very self-organizing. So what that means is self-governance. I'm not going to time you. I'm not going to tell you when to move. I'm not going to really give you much more than a little bit of instruction. So you're on your own to manage this, really, and be a grown-up about it, right? Be grown-ups. Because a lot of times, when you get people like me, we don't like to over-orchestrate, like to really facilitate and manage the humans. I find it's much better when we really kind of open up the tap and really allow ideas to flow. So for some of you, this may be a little uncomfortable. You might not like it right away, but just go with the flow if you can for this morning. What I really like is that this supports powerful transformation. Powerful transformation, not just a collection of sticky note of ideas. I'm sure many of you have been to gatherings like this where what you get as an output is what I call the sticky note manifesto, right? It's like all over the walls, everything looks important. It's all juicy and delicious. Oh, okay, yes, I'm on board. And nothing happens, right? I have to tell you, our little design team, we're really serious, are we not? We're very serious about setting a strategy in place for the Rocky Mountain Conference that really moves this conference forward in a powerful way that helps lift up churches, lift up the conference, lift up the conversation about the United Church of Christ. That's what this group is committed to, this small design team that's a subset of the board. So I love that open space creates the opportunity for positive transformation, allows you to really feel inspired and nurtures creativity, right? This is not reductive, it is productive. And we're looking for a lot of rich contribution. It's also a really useful tool for identifying critical issues. I'm not going to pretend to know everything that goes on in the milieu here, right? I don't know what you brought. You might have some important stories. Some of you might have some sob stories. Some of you might have some persistent frustrations, or, golly, I just have this great idea. Why can't we get it off the ground? Everything matters here. So critical issues are important. This isn't just, skipping through the dandelion field with our, braids flowing. Oh, we're visioning. This is an opportunity to bring it, right? This is an opportunity to open the conversation for real. All right. So as you can see, it gives you an opportunity to voice your passion and concerns, to learn from each other. Learning requires listening. So I'd rather see bigger ears, smaller mouths as we go forward. Big ears, open heart, and when appropriate to take collective responsibility for identifying, finding, articulating solutions. So there's a lot of room, as you can probably sense, to really kind of let this be a useful and productive Pandora's box this morning. Okay. All right, so now here's some kind of ground rules, and I realize there are probably people who have been doing this open space stuff longer than me, and you're better than me, and maybe I've made some boo-boos on the slide here, didn't quite get it right. So if I've left anything out and you're really, you would like to contribute to refining what the offerings here, please don't be shy. So we're going to, in just a minute, allow everybody to begin to say what's important to you. You're not going to tell me, we're not going to go around the room and make everybody talk to each other. Basically going to use these flip charts to begin to identify all kinds of wonderful ideas. Your job is to be invitational. You don't have to, you could basically take this morning and say, man, this is so not interesting to me, I'm just going to chill out and sit in the room and see what happens. Others of you may be chomping at the bit, I can't wait, I've got so many things I want to put up on the flip chart. Everything is valuable, everything matters. Whoever comes to whatever conversation this morning is whoever is meant to be there. So I'm not going to try and organize you into little pods of the group who's interested in this or the group who's interested in that. Y'all are going to do that. All right? We're going to identify issues and opportunities related to our theme. And what is our theme? New story, right? New story for who? The conference. New story for the conference. That's our theme, no big deal, right? It's important that if you are excited about something, step up. If you have real passion for an idea, step up. Galvanize a conversation. And all you're responsible for is starting the conversation. So none of you has to facilitate. Nobody has to be in charge. This would be hard for me. It always is because I facilitate. So I always want to get the flip chart out. I want to start writing. So that's not what this is. Let's just say, for example, Benjamin's really passionate about what?
Teenagers.
Really passionate about teenagers. So how might we think about teenagers in the context of our creating our new story? So Benjamin might go over to the flip chart and say, I'm Benjamin, really interested in teenagers. Takes it over here, and he'll just stand and wait and see if anybody else is interested in teenagers. And if you are, come over and join the conversation. You might be excited about something else. You can go to as many or as few conversations on various themes as you would like. Let's say that Benjamin's interested in teenagers, and he gets enough of his fill, and he's interested in some other topics. He just talks to another person at his group and says, all right, I'm leaving. You can continue the conversation, or the conversation can collapse. So it's really, really generative, and I know many of you have been through this before. You don't have to be an expert with answers. You just have to care enough. So you're probably beginning to see that one characteristic about open space that is powerful and unique is that it is passion-driven and it comes from caring, right? And there's a tiny bit of courage in it too, right? Tiny bit of courage. So it's caring, it's passionate. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to care enough to get things started. If nothing occurs to you, it's totally okay, right? So, we're not going to make everybody do this. You join because you are inspired, because you're passionate, you've got a critical issue, there's a burr under your saddle, a rock in your shoe, an appetite for something new, any number of motivations. In just a few minutes, it says in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you to come forward, grab markers, grab a piece of paper, you'll write your topic and your name, you're going to read it out. My name is Ben, my issue is teenagers, and then you're going to post it on the wall. Let's see, Tom, where's Tom?
He's up with the wall.
Oh, he is? Who's got the blue tape? There are rules about what we can do to the walls. So
John will get the blue
John's the man, okay. So then we're going to post all these various topics on the walls, and then y'all are going to go talk. All right? So before I go on, I think I've got a couple more things I want to say about the ground rules. Any questions? Anything that's not clear about this? Especially for those of you who are like me that really like a rubric and like a lot of rules. Feel better in a box instead of out. So I'm going to just trust that if you have no questions that I've said enough. Yeah.
This is pertaining to the story of the conference. Right? I'm passionate about teenagers being involved in the conference. Right?
So Rebecca's question is, this is pertaining to the big thematic question, what is our story? Well, I think I've got it on the next slide. What is it?
Oh, just that it's teenagers.
Yeah, it's teenagers in the context of the conference. Yeah. And you know what? I hear that and I don't even know what that means. And maybe Ben doesn't even know what it means, but it's totally okay because it's just a topic that he's passionate about. Something cool is going to emerge. Something cool will emerge.
Well, Kimberly, I found too that sometimes getting together in a group and saying, I don't know what that means. What does that mean? That's where the conversation blossoms.
Yeah.
You know, so it's not like having an answer to go to a group, but saying, ooh, I want to talk about what that means. Without knowing.
So it's really okay to not know. Not knowing is such a good place to be. It's different than the voice of doubt, which is also very valuable. But not knowing, don't know, is a really good place to have your head. Curiosity and inquiry rather than statements and positions. Okay. Oh, John, you're fabulous. Oh, that's great. Okay, on to the next one. Okay, so again, whoever comes, it's a weird way to write the sentence, but whoever comes are the right people or is the right person. People who care. If nobody comes, then maybe your theme is a bad idea. It might just be bad timing. Maybe you're the only one who cares about it. No big deal. Just see what happens, and you can even write your own flip chart and bring your whole agenda to the conversation as we come back together. Whatever happens, right? And this is a hard thing for all of us, especially in the Western world. Whatever happens is the only thing that could have happened. So invite yourself, allow yourself to be surprised. Be delighted in the conversation. Right? Create room for possibility in the conversation together. I love this. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. Who cares? Right? Really just allow, again, think about going with the flow. I realize, this might, for some of you, might be the very first time you've actually ever even thought about this idea. Really ever thought about the conference in the context of co-creating a future together. And that's really great. Whenever it starts is the right time. Don't get worried about the clock. This is, again, another hard thing for us, and I set a timer for everything. My daughter has thrown so many in the trash because I keep trying to get her to be on time. Hates the timer. I love the timer. But this conversation is not about watching the clock. This conversation is about being a conversation together with each other, listening in poetically on ideas that maybe we hadn't even given voice to. Right? When it's over, it's over. So if you finish your conversation in 10 minutes, right on. Move on to the next. Go have coffee. Take a bio break. But don't rehash it another 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 50 minutes, etc. So when it's over, it's over. So these are a little bit counterintuitive process rules for groups. But in a short amount of time, you can really create a lot of good energy, and that's what we're hoping for this morning. Okay, so our big question, what is our new story? Maybe second to that, what do we want our conference to become? So here's the context. We don't have to worry about answering the question of why are we on the planet, right? So as you think about this future conversation, I do want you to recognize that the Rocky Mountain Conference Board has refined and clarified, perhaps simplified the mission. We, the Rocky Mountain Conference of the United Church of Christ, exist to encourage and grow the United Church of Christ faith community in our region. So that is why this conference exists. And we have two values that we established are important to us. And these are, I would say, John, do you think it's fair to say these are our working values? They might get a little refined out of today. We may discover that there are some additional values that we hadn't identified. But the board really worked hard in November and February to say, these are kind of the two biggies for us. We engage in covenantal relationships with the holy, our neighbors, ourselves, and creation. Right? So there's this sense. The root in here is the sense of relationship with one another, with what is holy, with the conference itself, and with this bigger idea of creation. And then we express enduring faith in the transformational work of the Spirit. And I guess, I'd say from board member experience, would somebody kind of just help us remember how powerful this conversation was? Would anybody brave enough to say? I could give my opinion, but I'd love to hear from board member. You guys are going to chicken out on it? Oh, Marcy? Corbin can do it? Okay, Corbin. Okay, yeah, they'll have it. Okay, come on. There.
Well, I'll just say, just process, being good UCCers,
We'll be your standing
is that we were trying to get to all these details, but what we kept finding is that, we wanted to say we're passionate about social justice, we're passionate about each church having autonomy but being connected, but it kept coming back to our wonderful guide here saying, but what is the core value in that? And as we began to explore the second one, I think what I'm remembering, the spark there, is that we exist. The fact that we're here today, the fact that we're a part of churches, is because we believe that there is something transformational about this faith journey. There is something transformational individually, communally in the church, but also a call to transform a world that is often broken. And that there was this real sense of that's why we come to annoying church council meetings. That's why we put up with annoying youth directors like myself. It's because there's something transformational that maybe we've gotten a touch of, that we've witnessed, that we've been a part of, that inspires us to know that there is yet more light to come. That God is truly still speaking, and that we are agents of that happening in this world. So I think for me, that's the spark that's glowing from this.
And I think one of the pieces of that conversation being so powerful and even the conversation was transformational in a sense, and that is we got really clear that there are 100 different ways, 1,000 different ways to say these things. But the conversation became enlivened, and I'd say there was a spirit of holy debate about how to say these things, because we all agree that every context needs to be able to see themselves in this languaging. And so we spent a lot of time crafting words that express this deep value of inclusion of context. And so that was the other part that was really exciting, is to start understanding how many churches are going to be joining in this experience, and that if we can create the right language and the right vision, it will open up doors in ways that would not be open. And so the languaging part itself was really powerful and alive.
Okay. All right. So as you think about what... So as you think about the future and the story we are becoming, how we might shape our story together, our shared future, it's within the context of this mission and these values. So if it's helpful to you to write these down so that you can carry them with you for the rest of this afternoon, I'll just leave this up for a few minutes and give you a few minutes to sit with these important words, because I will tell you each one was hand-selected, like building a little wall out of rough-hewn stone. Each one was hand-selected and placed where it is on purpose, with intention, with a lot of thought. And I would say this, I can't remember, Brenda, how you said it, I just remember people were like, it's the Holy Spirit, oh! in the conversation. So I'm just going to give you a few minutes to write these down, if that's important to you. If you've already got these committed to memory, because you have photographic memory right on. But it's important that you know that these words help shape the context for how we think about the future. If we go back to our yin-yang slide for a moment, mission and values are the core of the Rocky Mountain Conference. They're on this side of that circle. They're on this side of the paradigm. Okay? So I'm just going to sit over here for 60 seconds. Okay, I think we're ready for the next slide. Okay, so. Oh, go back? Oh, okay. Sorry. Should have checked, I'm sorry. Okay, everybody who wanted to write down, good? Okay. So, on to our last slide, Corbin. I think this is the last one. All right, so at this point, we're just about to release the energy, release the creativity, release all y'all. So I just want to remind you of a couple of things. If there's something that you want to do, something you want to talk about it, then you take care of it. You come up here on the flip chart, write your name, write down the topic. Grab some tape and go stand by a wall or a window and see who comes to join you. I want to make sure that you're clear again that this is about being with each other. It's not about taking a position. A friend of mine distinguishes a position from a stand. A stand comes out of your commitment, right? The commitment is really rooted in the core ideology of the conference. So I want to make sure that you're clear that this is about being with each other. Being in conversation, being open, creating space. Remember that presence invites presence, right? Presence invites presence. This is, again, each of us might have our little backpack of grievances, ideas, etc., that we want to bring to today's conversation. It's important to bring that, but be present with your colleagues. I love this, even though it's a weirdly phrased sentence. So just hold open the possibility, what if this all really works, right? What if this process really works? What if this really allows us to capture the incredible richness that resides within each of you to contribute to this conversation about the story of the conference? Be generous. Offer yourself freely to the conversation. I mean, so much of this is, I'm guessing, rooted right in your faith tradition, in the practices of your church, in the way that you worship. Open space is like a naturally aligned, easy process for UCC churches. Less is more, have fun, and play. So I think, and I can't remember if because I wasn't sure that I was going to have slides. So, no, okay, go back to this one. So there are just a couple more things I want to say. There's something called the law of 2 feet in open space. Does anybody know the law of 2 feet? Law of 2 feet? John, do you know it well enough that you could say it?
Well, I don't know.
Okay. Okay, so if you do, I'd have you come and say it. Do you want to come give it a shot?
Give it a shot.
You want me to give it a shot? Okay. All right, so the law of 2 feet is this. 1, your head and your body need to stay together. So that means that if your mind starts wandering, so do you, right? So if I'm in the teenager conversation and I am not either contributing to the conversation or learning from the conversation, Those are the two qualities of engagement we're looking for. I'm not contributing or I'm not learning, and I find my mind wandering, which is often an early indicator that you're no longer engaged, and it's time for me to move myself out of that conversation and go find another conversation. So that's it. Either you're in or you're out of the conversation. And if you find your mind wandering, it's either an opportunity to check in and push your own refresh button to reconnect to that conversation or move on to something else. I'm going to guess there are going to be a lot of juicy conversations happening. So we're getting ready now to move into the open space part of our morning. And we've got a good long bit for that, but I'm not going to put a time limit on it until I see what's happening with you guys. And then I might. I do know we're breaking for lunch at 12:15. So we'll be done with this at 12:15, but how it's going to go over the next 2 hours and 15 minutes, I can't predict totally. We're going to take a little break. Tom's going to offer some announcements, and I'd like you to come back at 10:10 after Tom makes his announcements, and I want you to start doing your flip charts, okay? Start identifying those ideas or topics about the story we are becoming, and then we'll move into the next phase of open space. Is everybody clear enough that you're comfortable? Maybe not clear as a bell, but clear enough that you're good, okay? To you, know that this is not the end of the conversation. This is just really the beginning. So we don't have to resolve every issue out of our open space conversation. What we're hoping to understand this morning are what are some of the really big, attractive, meaty, juicy issues and topics that we want to address as we consider our future in this co-creation of a new story for the conference. So, we're also interested in lunch, right? Lunch sounds really good. What's that? So what I'd like to do now is just ask those of you who, if you stayed with your group as a kind of the sort of sparkler convener person, if we can just have a quick group report out from each of the topics. And we've got right now about 45 minutes, maybe a little bit less, to really just listen in on each other's conversations. And I realize that many of you went to many of these conversations. What I want you to be thinking about and listening for as we enter into this next phase is I want you to be listening for where are there connections, where do topics connect, and is there maybe something underneath these topics that might be bigger, broader, or deeper, or more thematic. Don't know? Just ask that question. So we're looking for two things. How might topics connect together? And what might be actually underneath these topics that might be more universal or more broad? Make sense? Okay. So which group would like to go first? Who's excited to talk about what your group discussed? Okay.
We spoke about diversity.
And where is diversity?
Diversity is in the back of the room next to the coffee. One of the things that we addressed was how can we get more representation from people of more diverse cultures, racial, sexual orientation, into the conference, workshops, annual meeting, conferences, whatever. And one of the things that we thought would be, it would help if the conference would be more intentionally invitational of such folks. We've got some churches that may be Japanese or Samoan, and I don't see the representatives here. Until James came in, I didn't see a single black face in this group. I think it would be helpful if there was a more personal invitation to those churches to become involved and to more mainline churches in our UCC groups to send representatives who are, and delegates who may be more representative of such diverse groups. And I think that's the theme I've seen here in some of the others, how to reach out more to different groups or different churches who haven't been involved, how to increase the, like the who isn't here piece, which would have that same theme.
Great, okay. Anybody else in the diversity conversation have anything to add to that? Really thematically, how is it to be more intentionally invitational? Anything else to add for the moment? Yes.
Thank you. I fumbled and stumbled as I looked around at us. I saw that we're all mostly of the pink persuasion, and I know our churches are much more varied than that. So, in Greeley, the divide is Anglo-Latino in the most part, though our Somali immigrants are afraid to form a mosque because of the threats of violence. So, in any case, I fumbled and thought, I'll put up Latino Latinas, ? And our wise elder, Martha Gentry, a force of nature on oxygen, and I stood and she talked about how their church in Gunnison, their social justice ministry, went to other churches and formed a group that invited the police to come so that they could give them an alternative voice to the voices saying, get rid of those people. And so part of it was to humanize Latinos and other immigrants in Gunnison, and also to address issues of things like raising questions about structure, about the Immigration Act and what we need to know about it, about getting more staff on the driver's license bureau, because next year driver's license will become IDs and there just aren't enough staff. So things like that on the one hand humanize a relationship, and on the other address structural issues. Then we have some wonderful ideas about shared choirs and building bridges that way. Other people, I asked people to put their email address if they'd like to get the compilation. We have someone in one of the board members near Aurora whose ministry is to provide after-school programs for Latino children. So in any case, that's an addition to the, certainly under diversity, but I think also justice ministry.
Okay. So when you stand up, if you'll say your name and where you're from, that'd be super helpful. Just go back and say.
Steve Monholland, First Congregational Church, really.
Yeah. Okay. So, ready? Sure. Oh, you're going to say your name.
I will. Karen Della Paz with Wild Rose Congregational Church, UCC, in Evergreen.
I'm Luke Grove from UCC Longmont, and playing off of the diversity theme, we talked about who isn't here. And we didn't take it from the tact of who hasn't engaged in the UCC yet, but who is a UCC member or a church that hasn't chosen to be here, and why. And there were a lot of guesses that we had as to why people weren't here, and a lot of tasks of inviting and engaging people that we lifted up. And if you'd like to learn more over lunch, I invite you to come talk to me, and I can share more about our conversation.
Is there anybody in that conversation? Do you have a little bit more to add to that?
Sure. You weren't there.
Well,
So he might have something to say.
I was, because we had that conversation one window pane over from you. So I think this seemed to have a lot of energy to it.
Who are you?
My name is, thanks, Sue. This happens when I was going to preach too sometimes. Sue, I'm Ben, and I'm from First Congregational Church in Greeley. And Sue's a member of it. So she can say that kind of stuff whenever she wants. Not that you can't, you're welcome to. Yeah, along with Luke, we were asking we were curious as I looked around the room, and we have 150 people or so. We have 80 churches, and I know that we have 6 or 7 for my church here. So that when you start to do the math, you realize there are a lot of churches who don't have anybody representing their church here. And instead of just being critical and of these churches who are here, we want to ask why. Why is it that they did not feel compelled to make it to this gathering? And in terms of us trying to create this new story, how important it is to understand how this new story has to incorporate all these churches. And so one of the things we really, that really came up in our group, and I think is also in yours, Luke, was just the communication piece. Is reaching out and saying, yes, we want you to be part of this actively. And a number of the people in my group who were talking indicated that they had a lot of participation in various associations, and they have heard all sorts of reasons why people are not participating actively. And these are the kind of conversations that I think really have to be on the table right now. If we are serious about having a story that incorporates all different voices that are already part of our covenantal community. So that was kind of where we're at. We have a lot of stuff. I know that Luke had a lot of stuff. So it seems like this is a key piece for us right now. At least the energy was there.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay.
There you go.
Yes. Oh, you don't need me. Just rock on.
I'm Kirk Thomas from Vernal, and I stuck up O&A and Boy Scouts underneath it, and because I thought they were sort of connected, and because they're my passion, so I thought, well, I'll start with that and see where it goes. And I want to thank the people who came over and chatted, because we had a really interesting conversation for a good 20 minutes or so about this, and some interesting ideas came up. I just wanted to say that how this sort of played out briefly is that because we have a long history in the national church and in the conference of inviting people through the O&A process to take part in our particular denomination. We also have a long old story of a connection with the Boy Scouts of America that goes back almost to its founding in 1910 with the congregational churches in our church particularly. And at one time we were one of the largest sponsors of Boy Scout troops in the whole country. And as you know, in the past 20 years, ever since the culture wars came to the Boy Scouts around the gay issue, UCC churches have been challenged by this, particularly as they've also become O&A in that same amount of time. So they've been torn apart by this issue, by one side of the issue and the other side of the issue. And a lot of O&A churches have invited their Boy Scout troops to leave and no longer be sponsored by their church. And a lot of Boy Scout troops have been encouraged by the Boy Scouts of America to leave UCC churches and find other sponsors who are more conservative and more compatible with the Boy Scouts' attitude. This has all changed in the last week. And the Boy Scouts have decided to abandon their policy about disinviting gay boys, and they're now inviting gay boys. And the reason I put that up there is because this requires a new story for all of us in the UCC and in our conference about how we're going to approach the Boy Scouts. And I was coming from a very specific agenda, and it was about maybe it's time for the conference to take the leadership amongst our churches and encourage everybody to go back and recreate covenantal relationships with the Boy Scout troops that are already with their churches, or to create new covenantal relationships with Boy Scout troops, particularly considering the fact that the conservative churches are going to be leaving that sponsorship role with Boy Scouts in droves right now. And the Boy Scouts desperately need a voice of progressive Christianity that's at least connected to them in some way or other. Well, anyway, that's the issue. But it went much further than that. It went into the whole idea of how you communicate this kind of openness, how the conference participates in this. It was a really terrific conversation. Do you want to add something to that?
I'll add a little.
And then, John, would you pass
I will
away?
do that. John Rospikas, UCC Longmont. Where the part of the conversation went to is how do we engage all the churches in the conference on topics like this? How do we continue these discussions beyond a one point in time? And not necessarily assume the model of somebody's going to come visit your church and bring the conversation to you. So we kind of explored how might we meet more often as a conference? How might we meet as associations, as portions of the conference, more often on topics like this, not just the traditional association meetings that maybe are more business-oriented and maybe have fallen to more just clergy participation. But how do we have this kind of conversation more than just once a year here?
Oh, I just wanted to make sure we didn't. I wanted to make sure we didn't.
Who are you? Where are you from?
Nancy Brizuela. I'm from Laramie, St. Paul's United Church of Christ. I just wanted to make sure we didn't forget about Girl Scouts and Camp Fire.
We discussed it.
We don't have any problems with that.
I'm David Pepperose, St. Paul's Laramie. I put on the sheet Ecumenical Interfaith. Didn't have a lot of people come over, I think in part because the heading was confusing. I put underneath it, big picture, big story, practically speaking. I'm not talking about we go with the Methodists to the local soup kitchen or we do Even Good Works globally together, but very practically. So we've got, our conference has been struggling to do the good work of the conference and pay its bills. I'm pretty sure there's a local Methodist judicatory in the same situation, a local Episcopalian diocese who don't know what the Lutherans are doing. We're all recreating the wheel all the time. So my desire is to see somebody on every mainline judicatory staff who's the conversation partner with the other people on the other judicatories. And I see some of this starting to happen through the national church and national staff. So that's good. I'm going to be in ministry 30 more years, folks. Let's, I want some higher up resources. I'm not saying merge. We don't have to merge. But hey, we can do this thing. I use Presbyterian curriculum. We can resource one another. So how do we do this together? I know we've had the culture wars, and we've been a little bit ahead on some of the culture wars, and some of our mainline brothers and sisters are really struggling with some of the pieces that we've, blown past them with. But hey, frankly, for those of us on the younger end of the spectrum, the difference between Calvin and Wesley don't matter. They really don't. So we're moving post-denominational. Let's have the conversation. Woohoo! Woohoo!
Ralph Dateman from First United Church of Arvada, and I want to pick up one thing that came out of the Who Isn't Here discussion before it got hijacked by somebody else. One of the things that came out of our discussion was that conference is not only a noun, but also a verb. And that as we begin to conference more with each other, and that becomes more of a process and a value, that maybe the whole concept of conferencing and attending a conference could have more excitement.
Is this on? Okay, I'm Renee Munoz from BCC, Bountiful Community Church in Utah. And I've noticed at our church that we have a wonderful, wonderful young people's teacher and activities and things like that. But once the kids outgrow that group and they become teenagers, we lose them. There's nothing right now for them, probably because we lose them all, but that works in reverse too. And I was really excited when you mentioned teens, but then you abandoned me. And we have a 16-year-old here. Where are you?
Both of us.
Oh, here. Where were you guys when I was addressing that issue?
We looked for it, we couldn't find it.
On the table back there. I needed you.
Oh, the table.
And what I wanted to bring out relates to who isn't here. It's our teenagers. And there was another one, oh, the Latinos too. If you have a large Latino element in your community and you're not getting their youth, they're going to gangs instead or whatever, or people want to get rid of them, you know, send them back to wherever they came from. I think it relates to what I wanted to bring out here, an idea I had. Also La Foret and the diversity, and there were a bunch of them here. And that is, we need something to retain the youth, to entice them and retain them. And I was in a youth choir along with my brother, and we became a part of something bigger than any one of us in that group. And the songs we sang had the message. There was something here about the spirit or something. What was that group?
Yeah,
the what?
Yeah.
What was it?
Knowing versus believing in God.
Yeah, knowing. Through the music, I mean, it's painless injection there. They're enjoying the music and getting the message through the words and what they're singing. And music just somehow has a way of saturating your whole soul. And it's something you remember. You remember music. You don't remember words necessarily, but the music. You find yourself singing the songs all the time throughout your life, and those words come back to you, the message. And so what I was thinking was, I haven't seen a choir camp. I've seen La Foret. Maybe I'm just not familiar with the other, and I was too old, you know, to get involved and know that. But in the UCC. But I thought it would be so wonderful to have a youth choir. I don't know, maybe you already have one in your organization. I don't see youth here. I don't see anybody that came over and showed an interest in the youth. And I just thought music would be a way to get them a part of something bigger than themselves. But you can't just put up a sign and say, come to the youth choir, because they're not there. My time's up. Thank you.
I'm Eileen McCarran, and I'm with Park Hill Congregational Church in Denver. And I convened, or I had a poster on UCC Voice on the issue of gun violence. This is actually an issue I've worked on for a number of years. I felt called to it, and I was sort of introduced to being social justice activist when I joined the UCC in Tulsa. And I talked about this last conference when we had breakout sessions and talked about gun violence, and then only a month and a half later, we in the state were just shocked by the Aurora shootings and the deaths and injuries, some lifetime injuries of people there. We talked in the people coming by, one of the first things was, as the conference, helping congregations to establish processes for addressing social justice issues, at times controversial issues. And I think we have a model that we can use from First Plymouth in Denver that has had a deliberate process they've gone through and took a position on the gun violence issue. People coming by talked, and if the issue broadened out to violence in general and violence prevention, and we talked about having Sunday school curriculum both for adults and children dealing with violence and violence prevention. Also, a good discussion about communication. As you know, in this state, as bills were discussed at the Capitol, which I confess I was very active in working on, that the rhetoric got very heated and ugly. And our legislators took quite a brunt of assault. And I think, and there was also discussion about how we need to talk about and become better communicators, and that we can, as members of a democracy, speak more quietly and listen to one another in voices that move us forward and not just get us into hardened positions. There was also discussion of the reinvigorating the peace and justice. I saw the report from the Peace and Justice Committee, a task force, that they're struggling, and I think that's something that's very important and reinvigorating. We talked about having a conference on peace and justice issues and convening one to invite and learn talk and learn how to talk and learn how to communicate on issues that are emotional yet very important on saving lives.
As one of the two youth here, I'd like to... Oh, I'm Abby Jordan, sorry. I'm from Clinic UCC in Fort Collins. And I would like to talk about the youth programs. I was at the La Foret table because I didn't see the teenager one. We looked for it. Sorry. Basically, the biggest thing for youth personally, where I became involved in our church, not when I heard about it in 6th grade, my mom started going, but when I actually met the other youth my age who go to that church. And for me, it started through our OWL program, 7th and 8th graders, it stands for Our Whole Lives, which is basically, it's not exactly sex education, it's relationships and being gay is okay, and basically it teaches how to be a healthy person and young person in your life and how to properly interact with other people. And it was more of a program that happened at the church and was sponsored by the church. And so many of the parents who had teenagers, 7th and 8th graders, signed their kids up, and that's how I met all of my youth group friends. That's how I met everyone I'm friends with at church. And so I think more programs like that would be very important, where, quite honestly, I probably wouldn't have gone had my mom not made me. But, that said, I mean, does any 7th or 8th grader want to do anything? So that said, I think there is definitely a gap between those early years, where it's, 1st to 4th-ish grade, and then about 5th grade to 7th grade is when kids stop being involved in their church, because their parents are like, well, fine, if you really don't want to go to church, you don't have to. I mean, who wants to wake up early on a Sunday morning when you're 13? And so for youth, it's really important that we get to know each other so that we have a reason to go to church, to go to youth group, to see people our age who we care about and we can connect to, as opposed to just, adults and singing in church on Sunday. And so I think that's really what needs to happen, is have more programs like that that draw in youth.
Thank you.
Perfect segue for me to take the microphone. My name is Jim White. I'm a pastor emeritus at First Congregational Church in Colorado Springs, and I'd like to talk with you about La Foret.
So Jim.
Yes?
Just to be clear, because we have also more topics, we'll keep it at 5 minutes.
I'll be shorter than 5 minutes. La Foret, keep the magic alive. That's what you're talking about there. We're having some trouble keeping the magic alive. We're happy to announce last year at the conference that La Foret is eligible for a $700,000 gift from the Colorado Land Trust Society. But we've learned in the process that before such a grant can be given to us for setting aside land at La Foret that will enable all kinds of programs, we have to clear a $200,000 debt that we required to make improvements in the camp some years ago. So although we talked in our group a lot about MAD camp, about family camps, about music camps, about youth programs, about scholarships, we also came back to the question about how in the world can we get that kind of money? Can we go to the churches and ask you to set aside a special offering or to contact their people? When I used to work for Q Mid-America Seminary, one of the things I learned is that pastors are the gatekeepers to the churches. I have an idea that I'd like to propose and put in the thinking cap of every pastor here. Would you make a personal contribution to La Foret? With that, you become committed to La Foret. You would open the doors of the church and the treasuries of your churches, and you would give us access to those in your church who have deep pockets. I would love for that to happen, and we could resolve this $200,000 debt. The kickoff, which I think will begin in some ways for us, on October the 18th, when Pat Schroeder comes to address us at the La Foret dinner. Thank you very much.
Anything to add on to the La Forêt conversation? No? 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 Okay, cool. We're going to do Susan, and then we'll go to you guys.
I'm Susan Bromley from First Congregational Church in Greeley again. So I started as a result of the second values judgment about transforming whatever we express enduring faith in the transformational work of the Spirit, and put up on knowing versus believing God. And got really interested. People were saying, some people think knowing is the internal part of understanding God, and believing is up here. God is a distant figure. Okay. Yeah, okay. God is a distant figure. And others thought that knowing God was the God that was in the sky, and believing in God was the God of the Spirit. So it was fun to do that and to get rid of verses and bring in knowing and believing God. How do we connect the two? We got into, do people have different stages in their life, with children being very close to God, and then in your adult years being farther away, and as your seniors moving back in to a sense of the Spirit of God. We talked about what the churches were doing to bring in the sense of Spirit of God with us. The Zay sessions, other people doing knitting, contemplative knitting groups. We talked about having periods of meditation in the services, and when do they do it? Do you do it at the beginning after the visit, or you do it later in the service, after the confessional part? And it was really terrific, motivating, exciting kind of session where I learned a lot. Someone else was saying, maybe what you're saying, wanting to use, is from thinking about the Spanish language, knowing God and knowing about God. So that, I don't know if anybody else wants to add, because it was a great group talking about getting into those issues.
Jane Ann Ferguson, Henderson Community United Church of Christ in Henderson, Colorado. I am working here with one of our illustrious elders, Rob Lapp, who actually wrote the topic for our discussion, Church as a Gathering of Spiritual Journeyers. And as I look back over it, I think, oh wow, what is this? What did we talk about that we haven't talked about a million times before? We're always on a spiritual journey. We should welcome everyone, blah, 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 blah. But what happened in our conversation, I think that was exciting to me, is that I kept hearing Rob say, life is a full-time job. And I think that the full-time job of just living life, what happens, and then you're supposed to go to church and do all these church things. On top of that, how do those interface? And so how does the church meet us in our real lives, where life is a full-time job, where we are raising grandchildren, where we are dealing with illness, where we are celebrating new relationships, where we're encountering doubt, all the things that we could name that are, the rubber hits the road in life. So our topic, as I listen to the rest of this, interfaces with, and began with, how do we get the people that are not in church that we really want to invite into our doors? And whether or not we may get them in, or we may get them in on a one-time basis. For, who was it that brought us the wonderful idea, I think, from Parkview, of having a beer-making class? at church, that the important part is we kept reiterating, how do we meet one another where we are on our spiritual journeys? And each of us, whether we know it or not, have a spiritual journey. Those of us in the church hopefully know, but many people don't know they're really on one. And we kept going back to the first value of making those that it's in the covenantal relationships that we make with the holy, which of course is not only the holy, believing in God, knowing God, but is our neighbors, is ourselves, is creation. That we began to find where journey, people, and where it all met together.
Okay, so I just want to check in on the time and say that I think we've heard from a lot of the groups and some nice overlap and quick, speedy reporting. We've got about 10 minutes to finish up here. So we're going to kind of shift a tiny bit to ask who's really compelled to now share from the wallpaper that we have not yet heard from. Who's really... Oh, Jackie. All right. So we'll see where this goes, and this might be the last one, or we may have room for one more if you're really...
So, Jackie Franklin, FCC in Colorado Springs, I put up creation. So I think I was a good segue because I think once you get disciples, then you have to, there's got to be a reason why we become spiritual people. There's got to be something we do with this. And so looking at creation and the global crises and all that, and the people that we had come said, okay, this sounds overwhelming, and what should we do about this? There are some people that are doing some things locally in their churches. We need to network. We need to resource. Where's the conference fit into this? So it was a really rich conversation about that. One of my agendas was we live in the West. We have some specific issues that have to do with environment in the West. How can we help each other, all these 70 churches, to take a stand and to help this region stand up for its rights when it comes to public land, when it comes to private land, when it comes to environmental issues. So the whole creation thing is also, as a church, how do we redefine or how do we recreate that whole theological narrative around how creation is a part of God, and that we as churches stand up for that as we try to become spokespeople for our earth, because without the earth we don't have any place to live. So that's it.
Jackie, right here. Jackie,
I'm Todd from Washington Park, UCC in Denver, and we had an impromptu conversation that turned into what I thought is a really interesting circle. It started with the question of, is the church an agent of social change? Lots to talk about then, what is social change? How does it happen? It went to, well, if that's true, do we have the skills for that? Do we know what social change is, how it happens? Which went to, does the conference have a role in resourcing that? That took us to another level of, what is the conference? And it came back, thank you for the invitation earlier, to the conference is a web of relationships. And then it came back to, relative to this process, this larger journey that we might be taking together this year, what structure or system, what things serve that web of relationships? That was our circle. And it felt really rich, so thank you. Any others in the circle want to add to that? We're in that conversation. Okay.
Todd, I would just echo that there were ripples in other conversations I was in the Who Isn't Here. We had a conversation. Just real quick, I'll say that I heard ripples in the Who Isn't Here conversation, in the leadership conversation, in the connecting rural churches to the UCC style conversation. So I just want to kind of name and lift up that ripple was present in multiple conversations that I was a part of.
What would you say that? that word?
Brenda, why don't you share what the that is for you?
No, I'm really asking what you mean by that, because that wasn't in those other conversations.
So, okay, so just the question of how does our conference staffing meet the needs of the rural churches, of addressing the question of who isn't here, of empowering leaders that are both lay and clergy. So the question of how our conference leadership paid staff fits into that and can move within that vision.
I'm Marge Erickson, and I wanted to raise the question with the conference about are the churches ready for the leadership of pastors that are being graduated from your UCC seminaries with the theological and with the biblical perspectives that are being taught in the seminaries? Are those being accepted in the local churches and in this conference? I'm a graduate of the United Theological Seminary in the cities in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and one part of my training prepared me to understand liberation, feminist, and theology, but it really wasn't something that was accepted in the church, the small rural church that I used to be a part of as a pastor. Our pastor, Rebecca, I'm from the Baptist Church, has a group of study that on saving the church, saving Jesus from the church. And if you haven't read this by Robin Myers, a UCC pastor and professor of philosophy, it might change what you're thinking about your pastor is being trained to do.
Okay, anybody else moved to speak about a paper? Okay, we've got one more. This will be it. So what's going to happen after we hear from this one person is that there's lunch, yes.
Kimberly, can I say something to ask her just before lunch after her?
Can you what?
Just before lunch, can I?
Yes, yes. And Tom has some announcements. We have some stuff we want to So, just so you know, though, what we're going to do is then take this small conversation, we're going to synthesize that with all these big papers, your design team, and really extemporaneously create the afternoon out of today's conversation, out of this morning's conversation. So just know that that's coming. We're not going to leave any of these things off the table, but we will be doing some discerning this afternoon. Okay.
I'm Cindy LaJoy. I'm with the new UCC Church in Montrose, and I was part of the rural church conversation. One of the things we talked about was the ways in which the conference might be structured differently to serve rural churches in more meaningful ways, looking at perhaps, and somebody mentioned that somewhere years ago there was somebody that was on the Western Slope that was serving the churches, ways that we could incorporate thinking rural and not just with the metro area, and that there are very specific issues that are unique to the small rural church that are things that are not experienced at all in metro churches. And as it related specifically to that is that even in rural communities where it's small and that web of relationship is very, very narrow and tight, declaring boldly who we are as a progressive church has long-ranging ramifications that people don't think about in terms of you lose customers, you lose relationships, you lose friendships, your children are ostracized. Those are things that we deal with in rural communities that in metro areas isn't quite the same. And so having some sort of servicing and resourcing specifically for the rural churches, of which we have many in our conference, would be a huge help.
This is just a quick advertisement, I guess, for the city of Golden. I'm sure most of you have had a chance to walk around Golden, and a beautiful place. I went to the Chamber of Commerce yesterday and picked up some Golden tickets, they're called, and they has coupons for different businesses in town, city maps. There's a Friday night street fair tonight, and there's a farmer's market tomorrow morning. So, as I say that, I also remind you that it's not an excuse to miss any of this conference. So when you have some time off, please go and check out the community that's surrounding us. It's a great place. And I'm sorry, all of that stuff is on a table as we walk to, Jane Ann put out there as we walk to the cafeteria.
Tom, are you ready? So you just give it to Tom. Which is potentially redefining the way we think about ourselves as an organization, as a conference. And I want you to understand too, now I'm going to put on my organizational consulting hat, that this is very difficult work to do in a group, in a big group, with lots and lots and lots of people. But it's really important that each of you understands that all of the people who are serving on the board and the staff intentionally set this conversation to hear specifically from you, so that as they go out with their responsibility of stewarding the mission of the conference on your behalf and in relationship with you, as they go out to speak with churches in the fall, to continue to enrich and inform what's at stake so that they can create a future direction and a future desired state, and thus, very importantly, a strategic plan for how that's going to get done. It can perhaps even redefine the structure of the conference, the leadership of the conference, the money of the conference, etc. That they're very earnest and serious in that intention. And that is why we are here. So this is not just a kumbaya moment. It's actually a really strategic moment. It's almost like a strategic pause for the conference. To be with you here today. We recognize that for some of you, this is a super juicy conversation, and for others of you, it might be like an ice pick in the eye. The last thing that you want to do. But I will tell you that this board of directors is so committed to listening that they were really clear that this was the must-be conversation to have at this conference, and that they really wanted to do everything that they could in their power, within the budget, to really invite perspective and invite conversation from as many people as possible, to really help ignite this visioning process. To help facilitate that, they did a lot of work over the course of the fall and the spring to really consider and interpret, translate, refine, and codify those two important concepts. One, which is the mission, and two, those values. And those are the guiding tenets for today. Mission, values. We used a very prescribed frame of reference for the mission and the values. So just in case you might look around the room, or you might have even looked at those value statements or the mission statement and said, oh, you know, I like this word better, or I like that word better, or I'm not sure I understand. I want to invite you to ask a question versus challenging the verbiage, because the idea that we set forth in describing the mission and the values are very specific. So the mission describes only one thing, it answers only one question, and the question is why? Why are we here as a conference? Doesn't answer the question of what we do, doesn't answer the question of what we believe, it doesn't answer the question of how we behave, it doesn't answer the question of where we are going. Where we are going comes out of today and out of future conversations over the course of the next 4 to 6 months. We just want to make sure we're all clear, so we're all on the same page. Mission answers the question why. Values answer the question of what do we believe at their most fundamental, the basic guiding tenets for this conference. And those are those two value statements that we put up earlier. So I wanted to just refresh that in everybody's memory and mind, so that as we go forward in this afternoon's conversation, you remember that that's the context. So you can just kind of relax. You don't have to worry. We've answered the question of why, which is informed not just by their thinking, but all of the collective wisdom of the conference leadership over time. And we've got some sense of what we stand for. So now we can really just lean into the possibility for the future that is informed in part by our conversations this morning. So, before we step into that, I'm going to ask each of these board members to tell them a little bit about themselves, tell you a little about themselves, and then we're going to do two different processes this afternoon. Okay?
Did I miss anything, Corbin? No?
So now we're going to shift our conversation a little bit. I want you to break up into groups of 4. I'm going to ask you to do that swiftly. I'm going to ask you to do it quietly. I'm going to give you some rules of what you're going to say in your groups, not surprising. And once again, I want you to do it, so I said swiftly, quietly, quickly. And, oh yes, I want to encourage you to go talk to somebody who you don't know very well, who you normally don't hang out with, who's not your clique. So just give you a chance to reach across a line. You might sense a little thread of theme around the relationship here. So let me just show you what I want you to do in your small groups. Right quick. All right, you're just going to share a moment of time. This is just a quickie energizer after lunch, right? So just going to share a moment of time when you had a personal experience of transformation. What's the story? 2 minutes per person. And the person with the shortest hair goes first, just to help you organize. All right? So, quick like bunnies, get in your groups of 4, go find people you don't know, ring the bell, and then you're going to go. Okay, J.J. So, each of you, again, has a different perspective, a unique point of view. You have some ideas of what the future could potentially hold. We're going to move into really thinking about what does the future demand from us and how will we do it. And here's how we'd like to have you shape your conversation. In your group, and we'd like you to organize into groups of 10. You can sit here, you can sit at tables, you can grab flip charts if you want, but don't feel hemmed in. We don't have to capture every single word. What's more important is listening to each other and generating your conversation. So imagine it's 5 years from now, and our web of relationship is so strong, effective, and powerful that we are an unstoppable voice for progressive Christian faith. What did we do? And remember that we mean this in the context of the Rocky Mountain region, and that what helps us think about this is this idea that we have of our guiding tenets of relationship, covenantal relationships, and transformation. So again, in your group, imagine it's 5 years from now, and our web of relationship is so strong, effective, and powerful that we are an unstoppable voice for the progressive Christian faith. What did we do? So go to it. You have a half an hour, groups of 10. You can self-organize with whoever you want, and I'll see you back here in about a half an hour.